Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the Tailscale at Work webinar series. In today's episode, we will be walking you through the basics of Tailscale. We'll start with an overview of Tailscale, what it is, what are the benefits, and then we will walk you through how to sign up, how to install Tailscale on multiple devices to create your own private network, and then configure AWS resources for remote access using Tailscale SSH. Today, your host will be myself and also Alan. Starting with me, I'm part of the sales team here at Tailscale. Prior to Tailscale, I was at AWS for 3 years, helping customers of all shapes and sizes figure out, the best solution for them. Alan has spent time both on the client side, managing infrastructure, and then also on the vendor side, helping clients figure out if Tailscale is a good fit for them. We both work with customers of all shapes and sizes here at Tailscale. And so we wanted to consolidate the lessons that we've learned into this webinar for folks to, browse and peruse at their own pace. So what is Tailscale? Tailscale is a mesh-capable VPN and overlay network for managing secure remote access to shared resources and IT infrastructure. Our user base is pretty enormous for a company of our size. We have hundreds of thousands of people already using Tailscale, either for their personal use or also at work. We have thousands of companies using Tailscale in their workplace, and hundreds of those companies using it across their entire organization. Most people use Tailscale for free. Some of those bring it to work with a subscription plan for their team. But if you're listening today, you're probably curious about what Tailscale looks like at work and what are the benefits. So starting with the traditional VPN and really the problem that Tailscale was born to solve. In the old days, if you plugged into the physical LAN or joined the Wi-Fi, you'd have all kinds of unprotected servers and dashboards, sometimes with no authentication. Companies have learned a lot over the last years and decades. If you have an unencrypted physical network, someone will figure out a way to get onto that network and do all kinds of damage. They call this the hard, crunchy outside, soft, chewy inside problem. And so Tailscale is born to really solve the problem of you can't trust the physical network, but you do have to be able to trust some individual devices. So this is what Tailscale really helps with, establishing trust identity between pairs of devices. It really has a powerful way of taking your existing identity provider, which is the trusted source of identity, and applying those identities to each device in the system, and then helping those devices help find one another, connect to each other, and trust each other. In terms of customers and use cases, I'd like to highlight a few of the most common ones that we hear working with customers. So Instacart, they're using Tailscale for developer remote access to cloud resources with a traditional VPN architecture. So one common misconception is that Tailscale can only be deployed as a mesh. We use the term mesh capable because you can absolutely deploy Tailscale in a traditional VPN setup, the benefits being simplicity of use and also simplicity of management. So you can see here that Instacart used subnet routers, Tailscale's way of setting up a potentially traditional VPN architecture. And it was a drop-in replacement for their VPN nodes and let them connect to their entire LAN and also managed cloud provider services such as Amazon RDS. To quote Mike, who's a staff software engineer there, he said, "It's dead simple for end users. Small little cuts really affect people throughout the day, and you don't want to break people out of their programming flow just to log into a VPN." With Machinify, they also use Tailscale for developer remote access to internal resources, specifically for high trust compliance, and also implementing the mesh architecture. So they've actually taken the next step to move from traditional VPN architecture to a mesh architecture. Machinify uses Tailscale SSH and ACLs, or access control tags, to manage access to over 2,000 AWS instances. To quote Gavin, who's a principal engineer there, he said, "There's no setup, no configuration, and we had it rolled out across our entire fleet in an hour. Frankly, it was the most joyous experience I've ever had with any commercial product." Lastly, with Finter, this is a very interesting use case of fleet management to connect remote cameras in a hub and spoke network over 4G connections. So Tailscale supports all the major operating systems and has a large list of packages and binaries available, so that you can try to install Tailscale on any device that you might have. If you do have some devices that you can't install Tailscale on directly, such as a printer or something without an operating system, you can use a subnet router, and that's a way for you to provide access to the rest of the LAN. To quote Christian, who's their head of networking operations, he said, "I save a lot of time working over Tailscale. It's so much simpler that I can now actually do other work. It's more reliable than the other VPNs that we tried. It never crashes, and it's always available." So with those customers and use cases in mind, I'd like to now turn it over to my colleague, Alan, who will walk you through how to set up Tailscale within 20, 30 minutes and get up and running as quickly as possible.
Hey, thank you, Chris, for the introduction. Hello again, everyone. My name is Alan Valancourt. I am one of the solutions engineers here at Tailscale. And so we're just going to jump right into the demo portion of Tailscale, how to get it up and running and connect to an application that might be running on your network or your cloud provider, and just show you how easy and quickly you can get going with Tailscale today. A couple agenda items here, or description of what's on what you're seeing here. We have the Tailscale website, so we're going to start off here. I have an AWS console up and running, so you can see some existing servers that I have out there running that we're going to leverage to connect to, as well as my terminal screen here that will run some Tailscale commands through this as well. So the first things first, when you're brand new to Tailscale, where do I begin? Is you go to our website, tailscale.com, click on the try for free button, and it's going to take you right into our login page where you sign up with your identity provider of choice. We support pretty much anything that is OIDC compliant, so you can just click one and log right in. For today, I'm going to go ahead and sign up with my GitHub user account. So we're going to sign in with Alan at Tailscale Webinars, put in my password here. We're going to authenticate and log in, follow the flow of your IDP. We're going to authorize it. And if you have never created a Tailnet or a Tailscale account before, it will create one here on demand. So today I'm going to create a multi-user Tailnet called Tailscale Webinars. And so right there, my account's created within Tailscale. We do not store usernames and passwords. That's part of your identity provider, but I now have an account. So second thing I need to do is add my devices. So I want to add my Mac device here so I can connect into my Tailnet. So I'm going to click this button here. It's going to actually redirect me into the Apple Store. So let's go ahead and open that up here. Log in with that. We're going to download it here. And in my case, since I've run this before, I've already see the cloud there. Excuse me, pre-authenticated. I'm going to go ahead and say open. And you can see that it opens up Tailscale here in my system tray. Let's go ahead and get out of that, and we can close this as well. So what we need to do now that we've installed Tailscale, we need to authenticate and log in. Application, we need to log in with our local client. So I'm going to hit login. It's going to take me back to my browser. Because I'm already connected in, it says, hey, we're going to connect this device, and this is the name of my local Apple device here. So I'm going to connect it into my Tailnet. Give it a minute here. So it connects. Oh, there we go. So now login is successful. Get a little notification here if you want to include alerts, icon notifications, etc. And then it's going to redirect me to my administrative console if I have other devices. But now it's saying, hey, part of the user flow of getting you up and running is, hey, we've got our first device, so now let's add a second device. So we can start talking to one another. So if you have a Windows machine, Linux, Raspberry Pi, Android, Synology, or iPhone, iPad, you can follow the guides here and just quickly get that up and running for your environment. In my case, I want to connect to a server that we might have within our cloud environment. So maybe we're an IT organization, we use AWS, GCP, Azure, or whatever. In this case, I need to connect to this because I want to add this service into my VPN so I can leverage it. So let's go ahead and get the information needed for this device itself. We're going to pull the instance ID. We need the public IP or the DNS because I'm going to SSH into this box initially in order to install Tailscale. So first of all, I'm going to click on the Linux instructions here. I'm going to SSH here. Make sure I have the right information here. We're going to paste this. All righty. For those familiar with the command line, using the terminal in your own environments, this is your standard accessing information. Just from a security caveat, you notice I SSH'd here from it, but if you look at my security groups that I have on this device, just a little bit of security best practices, you definitely don't want to leave your SSH open for the whole world to access to. And part of the reason we're leveraging Tailscale today is we want to tighten this potential attack surface. We want to tighten it a little bit. So we don't want maybe my home IP address. If I'm traveling or that IP address changes, I'm having to change my security group rules. But in this instance, you can see that I have one rule that says, hey, allow SSH from my home IP address. So that's our basic rule, which is why I can log in using the key that I've already preset within this environment. Now, I'm going to copy this install script, and we have full install instructions that you can look right here. So if you don't want to run install.sh and our kind of automatic install, you can see, or if you have a custom Linux binary, there's a couple ways that you can get this up and running. So we're going to install this. It's adding everything based on my operating system. So we'll give that a second here. And now Tailscale is up and running. So what's really cool about this is now that, well, excuse me, I'll take that back. Tailscale is not up and running. It's installed, but yet it is not up and running currently. So in this case, there's a couple things I'm going to do. I'm going to set this up as what we call a subnet router. Probably saying, whoa, what is that in relation to what I'm trying to do? Here in our org, we have an application server that is running on one of our websites right now, internal server that users are trying to get access to. But this service has no public ingress into this. So I need to be able to have a way to access this private application. So I'm going to leverage Tailscale to do that. So I'm going to do that using what's called subnet router. So in my case, I've got it up and running within my environment, but before I start my Tailscale service, I need to configure IPv forwarding, etc. So that is up and running and we're good to go now. So now let's go ahead and get this going here. We're going to install. Whoops. So what happens when you copy and paste from something and you forget to remove the formatting. So let's get rid of that. There we go. So now I have started Tailscale. It's saying, hey, it's to authenticate, visit this URL. We're going to copy this. You notice in my my status page here, it's still waiting for me to authenticate. So, hey, it's saying, hey, add your second device here. So let's go ahead and paste this here. We're going to sign in again with GitHub because that is our IDP that we're leveraging. We're going to join the same tailnet and we're going to connect. It says, hey, you're about to connect the device and this is the private IP address of my EC2 instance. And there we go. And we notice here in this screen that we get a success message. Tailscale is up and running. So right here, it sees that. If I go back, refreshes that, we're like, hey, success, it works. So let's go ahead and hit that button. And then Tailscale Wizard will kind of walk you through about setting up DNS, inviting your teammates, setting up access controls. All a little bit more advanced features that you as a user or organization definitely want to dig into a little bit more so that you can get the most out of leveraging Tailscale. But for our instances here, we're just going to hit the admin console and go view that. And just wanted to walk you through high level of what we've done so far, right? Do not have Tailscale running on my Mac. I created a new tailnet. I've logged in, so we can see that Alan's logged in here on Tailscale. And we can see my information about my local device that's connected. We can see now this remote server that is also connected into Tailscale as well. And it has a private IP address. So every device that joins a tailnet, a Tailscale network, gets a 100 IP address. And this is leveraged and used within Tailscale to manage access and route traffic, back and forth to one another. All right, so now we've done that piece here. So let's exit out of my server here, excuse me. Oh. And here's what we want to do now. Remember, I mentioned a few minutes ago about, tightening down our security footprint. So in this instance where I have on this, let me make sure I'm on the right one. Let's go look here, my subnet router. Well, I have currently, if I look at my security group, I have the ability to SSH into this with my local key. But if you wanted a better way to manage your keys or security access, or you don't want to have to worry about rules along this line, well, guess what? You can use Tailscale and Tailscale SSH to tighten some of this down. So let's go ahead and edit these rules. Let's get rid of this rule here. So we're going to delete my inbound rule. We're going to leave my everything within the security group can see one another. So these services can see one another. So now I have removed my SSH or ability to SSH into this remote device. So let's try it out. So here's my private key. Here's the public IP address of the server. And this should fail because I've removed that rule. I no longer have access to publicly SSH into this device, which is a great thing from a security perspective. If having a local key, don't have to worry about that. So how do we gain access into these devices? Well, the cool thing with Tailscale and that command I ran called SSH, it gives you the ability to leverage Tailscale SSH to log into remote devices. So in this case, let's go do that and log into this device. We can log in via its IP address, its Tailscale name or machine name. So in this case, let's do this. EC2 user at, oops, and let's copy that here. And we're going to log in with its private IP address. And it's going to say, hey, authenticity of this host can't be established. This host key is known by other names because it is, right? There is my public name from the known host. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes. Oops, type it out. Now it's added. And just like that, I have connected into my EC2 instance that does not have an inbound security group rule to allow SSH. And now I'm on this box. I can actually look at my Tailscale network, my Tailscale information. We can see that, hey, this service can see my laptop. Locally, my laptop can also see this service. And that is one of the cool, one of the neat many features that Tailscale has. And for teams or organizations that you quickly want to be able to say, hey, I want to gain access, but then tighten down some of my security posture, reducing maybe these IAM rules, these security group rules where I'm allowing SSH in, people move around. When you're leveraging Tailscale, doesn't matter, because as soon as it's connected into the Tailnet network, I'm authenticated and I'm logged in, then I'm able to view that. So what happens if, let's exit out of this and I just turn off Tailscale. So let's say this is turned off. Well, let's see if we can access this device anymore. Guess what? And immediately I'm not able to access it because I'm no longer connected into my Tailscale network. So, all right, let's clear that out and let's verify that we can get back into the service, and we're in. So there we go. We are good to go at this moment. The other thing that I ran here is when I talked about, let's go back here, my EC2 instances, the Tailscale webinars. View these ones. Remember, I talked about saying, hey, we have an application server that is running within our webinar. Excuse me, take that back. An application server that's running within our network that we need to gain access to. Well, currently we cannot see this service because, one, it does not have Tailscale on it. Two, it does not have a public IP address. It is only a private device. So really the only device that can see it is the device itself here, the other subnet router EC2 instance that I spun up. So we're going to use a feature called subnet routing within Tailscale that allows you to route traffic from one network into another. So in this case, I have my application server running over here and my home or service aware. So I'm going to use this device EC2 that I just spun, put Tailscale on it. We're going to route traffic to it. So let's click on Edit Route Settings. And we're just going to say, hey, we're going to allow this to broadcast and see everything on my 172.20.20/24 network. Okay, so now that I've advertised my subnet, I'm able, or I should be able, to see my application that I have running within this private service here. So let's go ahead and see if we can see it. And there we go. So now, as an organization, I have my application that might be running on a private server. We don't want public folks to see this application or to view it, but yet we want to make it accessible for our employees. So I'm leveraging Tailscale to do that. And how I'm doing that is using what we call subnet routing. Again, a little bit more information about that you can find within our website there. But now I've got that up and running. And then same idea, right? So if I disconnect from the Tailscale network, my access to the network, or I'm traveling, or it's been turned off, guess what? My application access immediately stops because I'm no longer connected into that network itself. But in our case, let's go ahead and turn that back on and get it up and running. And just to verify, let's go look at the networking side of the fence here. When I look at my inbound rules, I have no public access into this network from home. I've removed that. So it's all happening via Tailscale and how Tailscale is managing access from itself. So, quick summary there, what we've done so far, right? We've created a tailnet, we've authenticated, we've added 2 devices, we've added a laptop, we've added a server that we might have running, as well as we've added access to a backend service. It could be an application server, it could be a website, could be a Git instance, whatever that might be. We're now accessing that, leveraging it through Tailscale itself. So Tailscale has these access control list that you can use to add granular access into devices that you might have on your network. By default, Tailscale is deny all. In that case, if that was enabled, no one would be able to gain access to anything. So every default tailnet that is set up has a line here called accept anything from any source with a destination of anything. So in our case right here, we can see that, hey, my source could be my Mac, my phone, whatever, and my destination is any device or application that is running within my tailnet. And you can use these and you can add a lot more granular access. So we have one by default here that says, hey, users that are part of a group called auto group member, where we have a couple auto groups here, allowed to SSH into different devices that are out there. We also have static groups that can be set up. So in this case, we're going to set up a simple rule here. We're going to allow users to access. So let me grab some information here. We're going to call this group here engineering. So let's edit this out. We're going to call this group. Oops. And we're going to put our users in this one. So we're going to put we'll get rid of Bob because Bob's not part of our group as well. So I've created a group called engineering. I'm also going to create a tag. Tagging is a way that we can leverage additional metadata by tagging things that then you can use in different access control rules to get even more granular control and access into devices here. So we're going to say this one called application, and we're going to let the auto group and be engineering, or let's see, the auto group. Actually, we're going to change this one to the engineering group here. So group engineering. So in this case, I've added a tag called app. The group that owns it is this engineering group, which now comprises of me as Alan. So we're going to double check that here. I've got another screen up that I'm referencing so I don't fat finger something here, which many times can happen. And then we're going to we're going to get rid of this global rule here because we do not necessarily want to have a star.star access for everything, right? We want to be a little bit more granular in our access here. So we want to make sure that we create rules or access control lists that are a little bit tighter. So in this case, we're going to call this the source of this one group engineering, and its destination is going to be two things. We're going to allow this to tag anything that's called application. So this user or this group can access anything here. We're also going to give this group access to the subnet. So devices that are on this subnet that we're forwarding, we're going to allow access to that as well, pretty much on any port that is out there. All right, so we've looked at our changes, which we did earlier, preview the rules. We can see, hey, here's Alan's rules, what he can have now access to, application rules here. And when I look here, we can see that we have a group called engineering. We have owners of a tag, and we have an ACL rule that says anyone within this group can access this application as well as anything within this subnet itself. So let's go look back at my device here, and let's assign a tag to this device because currently it's managed by me as the owner on this. So I'm going to hit edit ACL tags. We're going to call this one app because this is an application service here. All righty, so we should be updated there. So now we've got it tagged app and subnets and users there. So now me as a user, I'm able to access this device itself from that aspect of it. And if I ever decide to say, hey, this user needs to, or we need to make changes and get rid of access, into something along that line and deny access to a user within that engineering group, we can just change and modify our ACLs. So for example, if I just X out these ACLs, it's going to save it. And you notice immediately my access to this application stopped. And the reason why is because this app has a tag and we have an ACL that says, hey, or in this case, we do not have an ACL at all. We've removed the default one, and anyone in group engineering or anything that's tagged app, it's basically saying, we're sorry, there's no way of knowing who has access to this because we removed that default ACL. So when I hit save and I add that new ACL back, immediately my access is restored. Because Tailscale, you can have a fleet of devices across the world, and everything is managed and controlled by ACLs. So when you have engineering groups or you have HR groups or production groups, you can be very granular in how you set up ACLs. so that we can give users access to devices as needed at any time. And that is just some of the power of leveraging Tailscale ACLs, and more. So in summary, as we bring this demo part to a close, we created a brand new tailnet with a brand new user using our IDP. In this case, it was GitHub. We signed in 2 devices. So we had my local laptop that was able to connect into the network. Then we also added an EC2 instance that enables us to access application services within AWS. We secured our security groups and our inbound list by removing public ingress into our VPC. And we're leveraging Tailscale to now manage access to that VPC and the applications that reside within that VPC. So hopefully this is helpful and gives you a little bit an idea of the power of Tailscale and what you can do with it. And you can go out to tailscale.com right now, create a free account and sign up. But thank you for your time.
Thanks, Alan, for walking everyone through how to set up Tailscale in just a few minutes. What I'd like to cover now is the concept of incremental zero trust, which is one of the things that I think makes Tailscale special, and is one of the things that I hear from folks all the time about what they like about Tailscale's approach to network security, and also some of the topics that we didn't get a chance to cover today, which we can cover in a future webinar, or is something that we'd be happy to chat about if you get in touch with us. First is the concept of incremental zero trust. So we like to say the word incremental because by no means do you need to install Tailscale everywhere from the get-go and make sure everything's end-to-end encrypted from the get-go. As Alan demonstrated today, it's actually quite simple to create network connectivity from your users to the rest of your network, whether that's on-premises, in the cloud, or even in a physical office somewhere. So in terms of making rolling out of Tailscale simpler, we recommend a few simple steps. I've gone ahead and abbreviated and shortened these steps, but you can find the documentation that outlines these steps down here in this link that I've included below. So the first thing you'll want to do is install Tailscale on individual end user devices. That's what it means by secure individual user devices. Because Tailscale uses the WireGuard protocol, you're set on end-to-end encryption from the user device to the next device that you install Tailscale on. You can install Tailscale on a single machine on your local network and configure it as a subnet router, and that will then get you access to everything. The next step is to add end-to-end encryption to your most valuable servers one by one. So while the subnet router can get you access to everything, it doesn't provide end-to-end encryption to whatever end destination that the user is trying to access. So what step 2 is saying is you can then install Tailscale on some of your more valuable servers, maybe a production database, maybe more sensitive applications that only certain people get to access. Once you install Tailscale on that server directly, rather than using the subnet router, Tailscale will actually create a direct connection between the end user and your sensitive information, most valuable servers, and it will be end-to-end encrypted. After you've installed Tailscale on a particular all the servers on a particular subnet that have end-to-end encryption, you can then disable the subnet router for that subnet. And the advantage of disabling the subnet router is it prevents lateral movement. So in your access control policy or access control file, you can say that Chris only gets access to the production database and nothing else. So you can get very granular with setting up access controls and permissions by installing the Tailscale client everywhere. Step 4 is repeat all of these necessaries for each subnet. And so over time, you can remove all your subnet routers. Now, I will caveat, oftentimes folks say, hey, I'm using something like AWS RDS, some sort of managed service where I can't install Tailscale. In those instances, a subnet router is totally fine. You can even get more granular with a subnet router if you'd like. So for example, you can set up a subnet router to only advertise a /32 IP address space. So that way you can get very granular with, again, who can access what. Two big topics that we didn't talk about today, but are happy to go into more detail either in a meeting or if you go through our webinar series, is automation and compliance. So on the automation front, we talked about ACL tags today. What we didn't talk about were auth keys. So auth keys give you the ability to programmatically bring up new Tailscale devices without needing to open up a web browser. So it's a good way to via the command line onboard a new device as opposed to requiring user intervention. You can create auth keys that are tagged. And so what that does is when you use the auth key to bring up a new device, it will automatically be tagged and therefore inherit any permissions that that tag might have. And so that makes it really easy to roll out devices at scale. We also have ACL tests. ACL tests enable you to basically create a check for your ACL policies. So if you define tests and then you try to save ACL policy that doesn't comply with the tests, the ACL file will actually fail to save and will warn you. So that's a nice way to protect against human error or inadvertently giving folks access that you're not intending. We also have GitOps for ACLs. So instead of managing the ACLs through the admin console, through the web browser, as Alan showed today, you can use Git if that is a more familiar workflow for you, and also build in more automation that way. We also have Terraform and Pulumi integrations. So if you're doing infrastructure as code, you can also manage Tailscale that way. On the compliance front, we have user and group provisioning for some identity providers. That is an easy way for you to grant Tailscale access as part of the employee onboarding and offboarding process. You can also reference the groups that you configure in your identity provider in your Tailscale ACLs directly. So that way you don't have to redefine groups in your Tailscale ACL policy file. We also have Tailscale SSH recording. So Alan walked through Tailscale SSH today. SSH recording takes compliance to the next level, where you're actually tracking or capturing everything that happens during that SSH session. That is all done on the client side, and so Tailscale will not be able to see that sensitive information. Lastly, we have network logging. Network logging is the ability to see all the data flows for what's going on in your telnet. So you could see, for example, that Chris's device connected to a production database server and on this port and sent roughly the packet size was this big. So you can see metadata about all the connections that are going on in your environment. And so that basically concludes what we have prepared for you today. In terms of next steps, you can contact sales using our contact sales form on the Tailscale website if you'd like to learn more. If you'd prefer, a self-paced evaluation, or you want to just get your hands on Tailscale and set it up, inspired by Alan, you can do that really easily. You go to tailscale.com and sign up as Alan showed today. We have a very generous free tier. It's up to 3 users free and has, I want to say 98, 99% of all features enabled. The idea with the free tier is to really let folks try out all the Tailscale features and to determine what is best for them. So feel free to go to tailscale.com at any time and spin it up. Highly recommend getting your hands on it. I think that's the easiest way to learn after working with countless users and prospective customers and existing customers alike. So thanks again for joining us today, and we hope to catch you at the next one. Take care.